a 1.6 liter 4-cylinder engine. And the problem we're having with this car is that it cranks, but it doesn't start. Here you can see it says bad motor, and then on this side a bad timing belt as well. Let's do a visual inspection of the engine, check the fluids, and then try to start it, see what we can figure out. Alright, so here's a look at our engine bay. No obvious signs of engine damage at least. The timing belt cover is intact. Someone has smeared a bunch of silicone on this line here, but that shouldn't cause an engine failure. Alright, let's check our fluids. I don't know if you guys are going to be able to tell, but our coolant reservoir is pretty much bone dry. Alright, so that's not a good sign, but next let's check our oil level as well. Now I'm not sure if you guys are going to be able to see this, but this is where our oil fluid level is. And this is the maximum where it can be. This is way overfilled. But that's not the only issue. This is really watery. There's way more than oil inside this engine, that's for sure. Alright, I'm not going to crank it with that much oil in it, so we're just going to go ahead and drain the oil next. And here's how much oil came out of this engine. I would say there's at least an extra 2 quarts of fluid, I should say, that came out of this engine. Here you see it, folks. I think we just found out where our coolant went. And here's a closer look. This is not how your engine oil is supposed to look like. And this is mostly coolant, not mostly oil. So yeah, it looks like we have a little bit of engine oil mixed with our coolant inside our engine. Alright, so with that finding, we can conclude that timing belt is not our issue. This is potentially more like a head gasket issue due to an overheating problem. Alright, now before I crank this engine, and just in case it decides to start, I'm going to add a couple of quarts of oil to it. Alright, you heard it, folks. That was actually quite shocking. This engine ran pretty smooth. Not what I expected at all. But then unfortunately I had to shut it off because, there's no coolant in it. And it started overheating pretty quickly there. Alright, now I'm not going to put coolant in there because if there is a head gasket issue, it's just going to get sucked into the engine and then we'll be back to square one. But what I'm going to do next is actually do a compression test on all the cylinders on this engine. Now you obviously need a compression tester kit in order to do this. And if you don't have one of these and want to buy one, I'll put a link to a good set in the description box that you can check out. So in order to do our compression test, we need to remove all of our spark plugs. So in order to get to them, we're going to first start off by removing this cover. Alright, this should just pop off. Alright, next we need to remove our ignition coils. And since we need to disable our ignition system, we're going to actually first remove this connector. There's that. Next, these 2 bolts, they're going to require a T40 torque socket. Next, some wiggling, and this should come out. Next, we'll grab our 5/8 spark plug socket, and then we're going to remove all of our spark plugs. And we're going to start with spark plug number 1, which is going to be usually the one that's closest to your timing belt or timing chain. Alright, that spark plug was really loose. All these spark plugs are really loose inside the cylinder head, which I guess is a sign that this cylinder head was overheated at some point. Get spark plug number 1, nothing too out of the ordinary, pretty normal wear. Here's spark plug number 2, this is a little wider. And here's spark plug number 3, this one is also worn, but it's the cleanest. The porcelain part in the middle there, this is the cleanest of the 3 we pulled out so far. And here's spark plug number 4. This one's also just a little worn, some minor deposits on the porcelain. So we're also going to need to disable our fuel system. So we're going to remove our fuse cover. And then if you're lucky enough to have a diagram on it, just find your fuel pump relay, which is going to be this guy for us. So we're just going to go ahead and remove it. Next, we'll grab the right size connector from our compression tester kit. Then we just dab our finger in some oil and put some oil in the threads and the O-ring. And then we just screw it into cylinder number 1. Next, we grab our pressure gauge and connect it to our adapter. Like this. So next I'm going to have someone get in the car, crank the engine over 5 times for each cylinder with the gas pedal pressed down, and then write down our compression readings. Alright, that was pitiful. So let's write down 55 for cylinder number 1. Alright, let's do the same for cylinder number 2 now. Alright, cylinder number 2 actually got just about 100 psi, which is I believe to be spec for this car, so we're good there. Alright, next up, cylinder number 3. Alright, cylinder number 3 has got about 90 psi. But actually, as we were doing the compression test for cylinder number 3, I could hear air escaping into our cooling system. Here, I'll get you guys close, maybe you can hear it. So hopefully you guys heard it, but that basically means that the combustion gases can get into your cooling system, and then your coolant can be sucked into your engine as well. And obviously, that's not supposed to happen. Alright, next we're going to do cylinder number 4. Hopefully this batter still has some juice left. And cylinder number 4 is also at 100 psi. But again, I could hear air escaping into the coolant reservoir. Alright, so let's say on a car you're doing a compression test, the result wasn't this obvious that, air was escaping into the cooling system from inside of the engine. If that's the case, or just in general, you need to pinpoint the reason behind the loss of compression in your engine. What you'll need to do is do a cylinder leak down test. You basically use this kit to introduce pressurized air into a cylinder when it's at top dead center and both the intake and exhaust valves are closed. And then with the second gauge, you measure the amount of leak down in that cylinder. Now, some leak down is acceptable based on your car's make and model because you're always going to have some air escaping past the piston rings and whatnot. But past a certain limit, you're going to start wanting to look into why you have excessive leak down. So using something like this will give you a very accurate reading of how much leak down you have in a particular cylinder. And for those of you that are interested in buying one of these, again, I'll put a link in the description box down below. Now, another way you can do a very crude leak down test is to basically get the adapter from your compression test kit, and then you want to unscrew and remove this little Schrader valve that's inside the adapter. Next, basically, we're going to screw this into whatever cylinder we want to do a leak down test, and then attach our air hose from our air compressor. You just want to make sure that cylinder is at top dead center. That way, both the intake and exhaust valves are closed. Now, as far as how you can put cylinders at top dead center, well, if you could get to the timing marks on your camshaft, when you put that at top dead center, that's basically putting cylinder 1 at top dead center. Then you would look up the firing order and then turn the camshaft 90 degrees, and then the next cylinder in the firing order would be at top dead center. But that could be confusing, so I'm just going to show you an easier way. Alright, so basically on a 4-cylinder engine like this, you're going to have 2 sets of sister cylinders. So on this engine, it's going to be number 1 and number 4 that are sisters, and then number 2 and number 3 that are going to be a pair. And these cylinders go up and down together. In so many words, if cylinder number 1 is at top dead center, cylinder number 4 is also at top dead center. But one of them is going to be at the top dead center on the compression stroke, the other one is going to be top dead center on the exhaust stroke. So what you want to do is to grab yourself a long screwdriver, and then basically just put this down the spark plug holes, and it should become clear quickly which one is at top dead center and which one not. So here number 3, this went down this much. Number 4, just barely. See right there, that's it. So number 4 is at top dead center, so number 1 should also be at top dead center. That's it. And if you check and none of the cylinders are at top dead center, all you have to do is just to bump the starter, and you should be able to get them to line up at top dead center on the compression stroke at least. So next we go over to our compressor, and we're going to set our dial to about 40 psi. This is a pretty small engine, that's why I'm going to do 40 psi. Anymore, you end up turning the engine over, and that defeats the whole purpose. So if you have a larger engine, you can go up to all the way to 70, 80 psi even. Alright, so between cylinder number 1 and number 4, one of them is going to be on the compression stroke, one of them is going to be on the exhaust stroke. We're just going to have to try them and find out which one is at the compression stroke. So we'll start with cylinder number 1. So we'll screw in our adapter and then attach our air hose. An engine turn. God damn it. Alright, so 40 psi is even too much for this engine. We're down to 25 psi. Hopefully this time the engine won't turn. And then next we check our exhaust. If you feel air coming out of this, then that cylinder is on the top dead center exhaust stroke. And I bet you guys can hear that, so this cylinder is at the top dead center exhaust. Alright, so again, if cylinder number 1 is top dead center exhaust, that means cylinder number 4, its sister cylinder, is at top dead center compression stroke. So again, we attach our air hose. Oh, I can hear it. There you have it, undeniable leak into the cooling system. Now if you're doing a leak down test and you do not suspect the head gasket leak, then what you want to do is to listen to the exhaust in the back, see if the air is escaping into the exhaust on a cylinder that's where the exhaust is not supposed to be open and it's supposed to be at top dead center compression stroke. If air is escaping out the exhaust, then that means you have a burnt valve maybe, or a damaged valve, exhaust valve, I should say. And then if that's not your problem, then you would listen to you remove your air filter box, listen to the intake side. If air is escaping into the intake, then that would indicate you have a problem with your intake valve. You also might want to remove your dipstick and take a listen there. If air is escaping out of there, then that means you might have worn piston and oil rings on your pistons. That one's a little tricky. It requires more experience because some air is always going to escape past your piston rings. Now you could do a wet compression test to see whether you have damaged piston rings, but we'll save that for a different video. As far as what I'm going to do with this engine, well, I'm actually quite happy with the results we got here today. So I don't have to replace this engine. It doesn't seem. Looks like I'm going to be able to do a head gasket job on this and get it on the road again. Now I need to clarify something very important here. Just because we were able to verify combustion gases can get into the cooling system, that doesn't mean the head gasket is the problem. You know, it could be the head gasket, it could be a crack in your cylinder head or in your block. But you know, all things considered, the most likely scenario is that we have a weak or a bad head gasket and maybe a warped cylinder head on this car. If you guys are interested in seeing me try to replace the cylinder head and do a head gasket job on this car, the videos that I'm going to make from doing that are not going to be posted on YouTube, but they are going to be posted on my Patreon page. For those of you that are not familiar with Patreon and how it works, I'll put a link below this video on the screen and also in the description box to my page. You can go there and figure out how it works and see whether you want to subscribe to my Patreon page or not. I just restarted that page, so there are no videos there right now, but I'm planning on putting a lot of videos there, starting by the head gasket job on this car. So we're gonna wrap this up. Hope you liked this video. If you did, do me a favor and share it. And you also want to consider checking out these other related videos, of which I'll put links on this side of the screen and also in the description box down below. Thanks for watching. I'll see you guys next time.